You're listening to The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
All right, everybody. I know a lot is at stake, and honestly, I don't think you can overdo the rhetoric. So let me say this, and I mean it honestly. Anderson Clayton, like Abraham Lincoln, came out of nowhere and tirelessly, courageously, brilliantly started to organize and get people together and get them excited to prove to the world that, government of, by, and for us can survive. Anderson, thank you for joining me here on this last weekend.
Oh, well, thank you for that introduction. It was very, very kind. I appreciate it.
Well, you've done the work. I mean, it's amazing what you've done. And now North Carolina is in play. And, there are a lot of us who are optimistic about what you've done, but you're not only in play for the presidential race, but you could hold on to a very tough House race in the first congressional district and defeat possibly the worst Republican nominee for governor in the country. Talk about that.
Well, North Carolina has definitely seen its fair share of extreme Republicans up and down the ticket this year, whether that be Donald Trump at the presidential level or Mark Robinson, to your point, as a gubernatorial candidate, someone that calls himself, quote, a black Nazi. And I wish I was exaggerating that, but I am not in any way, shape, or form. And who has, went on a tirade across the state about how much could he hate people and become our next governor. And we're really lucky that we've had Josh Stein, who's our current attorney general, running as the Democratic nominee this year, that's run a campaign just about focusing on the issues that are important to North Carolinians across our state, being able to have a good job and access to good health care, which is something that, thanks to Democrats and Medicaid expansion, was able to happen in our state last year. And, no thanks to Republicans that have denied it for the last decade in our state legislature in North Carolina. And so we have the opportunity this year to send a powerful person to our governor's mansion, but also give him a break a Republican supermajority and give him veto power with our state legislature, because North Carolina is still one of many southern states that have gerrymandered maps across racial and partisan lines right now, unfortunately. So we're fighting for a lot this election cycle, but we feel optimistic about being able to defeat people like Mark Robinson and also folks running down the ballot with him in our state legislature too.
I'm worried about something. And I hope I'm wrong, but it seems like having a guy as horrible as Mark Robinson on the ballot might give permission to some Republicans to say, I can vote for Trump because I voted against Mark Robinson. Are you worried that there'll be that kind of ticket splitting?
I mean, I think that we are definitely going to see some of that, but it's maybe not because of the reason that you talked about. I think it's more, which it could be. I'm not or discounting that. I think it's just like what I've seen is that Mark Robinson had little name recognition across the state, and Donald Trump has been a household name for a long time. And I think that, name recognition, whether or not we like it, is still a very powerful tool in politics. And it is something that, he has been made out to be a celebrity, whereas Mark Robinson's name recognition really got started over the last year and also ended in the last year. And I think that it is a different situation of people, but, Donald Trump and Mark Robinson are one and the same. Mark Robinson doesn't exist without Donald Trump, because he is somebody that has enabled people like Mark Robinson, people like Carrie Lake in Arizona, right, to pop up in the Republican Party and especially in Republican primaries. And I think what people have got to take a look at, if you're thinking about it this year, is that, do you want to allow for a person that enables people like that to find themselves trying to run for public office and public service in the future? And is that a party that you want to be a part of? And I think that a lot of people are going to choose to reject that party this year. But, it's not the same Republican Party that we once knew.
Oh, my gosh. I think of the Republicans I've known in Illinois my whole life, including a Republican governor who's still alive and well and who's supporting Kamala Harris here in Illinois. And he is, solid Republican, but that party's dead. The one that's left is the one that threw the Nazi Party, revised the Nazi Party rally in 1939 in Madison Square Garden last week. People in North Carolina
Exactly.
can't have looked at that and said that's who we want to be.
No, and I don't think anybody did, right? I mean, somebody that sits up there and calls Puerto Rico garbage and allows for that to be on a national stage like that and harm people in just like very vile ways. Like people called it a hate rally, which I definitely agreed with. And I think that is something where we've got to look at how Kamala Harris, at least for me, in my state, I had her here just yesterday along with Governor Walz, and both of them just brought a lot of hope and optimism and light and just a real joyous sort of fight to what I feel like we need in the future in the United States and what we want to see as young people going forward in it especially.
So we got one side that is campaigning on not just on hope, but on issues. They're talking about things that they can do to make people's lives better, whether that has to do with taking on drug companies to make medicines more affordable or taking on corporate greed in order to bring down the price of like cornflakes, and cereal. The other side is just saying, yeah, you'll feel better if I stomp on somebody else. They've got no message other than hate. I just don't get, would North Carolinians be happy if there were a giant concentration camp, somewhere in the Research Triangle area where they could just stick everybody they find who they think is here illegally until they can deport them? Would that make people happy?
I think what would make North Carolinians, everybody right now really cares about the opportunity to have a job and ability to put food on the table and just your basic human dignity and rights right now. And I think that's what everyday North Carolinians are focused on. And that's what we've been focused on in this election cycle is how do you help people understand that $7.25 is still the legal state minimum wage along with the federal minimum wage in this country? And we need people that want to go in our state legislature and advocate for higher wages and be able to give us that. When Republicans have had control of our state house for the last 20 or 13 years in North Carolina and refused to give a raise wage in any of them. And I'm just like, that is something that young people right now especially care about. It's something that voters across the state, people that work service level jobs that folks don't actually think are ending up at the ballot box. I always like to talk about our service workers because I think it's such a huge category of people that we miss when it comes to our electorate. But a huge number of people still work jobs at Walmart and McDonald's and do not make $15 minimum wage yet. And it's the entire aspect of living wages is something that we have to talk more about, especially in a place like the South. I know it's not as much of an issue in other places and in other states sometimes, especially in places like Illinois or in New York or in California, but it's especially in places like North Carolina and in the deep South. I'm like, you still have folks that work for $9 an hour at things, and it's ridiculous, I think.
Well, affordability is an issue everywhere. Housing is very hard to come by in this part of the country. For young people especially, they just don't see how they're ever going to be able to get out of their parents' basements.
I think that's why I'm a very big fan. Kamala Harris's plan to talk about, rent caps and making sure that we are taking on landlords that are price gouging people living in the same conditions and they haven't changed, but their rent is still increasing from year to year, and why that's happening hasn't been explained to them. And I think that the idea of that is something that's really important because in North Carolina right now, our state legislature has a ban on municipalities or cities being able to institute rent caps. And so it is really, I think, the federal government being able to give back some autonomy to even smaller governments with what she's trying to do, because we know that we've seen people, especially in your ex-urban and more suburban and even rural areas, we're seeing gentrification of rural communities because of the counties and population dense areas that we have outside of major cities right now. And it's a lot of those communities are being pushed out and having to expand further because of growth in major metro areas in North Carolina. And so I think it's a huge problem, and she sees that for what it is and wants to take it on to especially help young people, but also just renters in general, which make up a huge demographic of our population right now.
So here you and I are, and it is the election is upon us, and we're talking about like the kinds of issues that people care about, what you have to do to make life better for people. I spent some time listening to Republican radio, to listen to people on the other side talk, and they never talk about how they're going to make life. The conversation you and I just had, it would feel like Mars on one of their channels, because they only talk about, like, we're going to throw people out. They're eating our dogs. I mean, the difference is, I don't understand why the election's close, but the difference is so vast. I don't think it's ever been this vast. They're different universes.
And they are indeed, but you definitely, I think you still have people that are undecided. You still have people that, I think the idea that we don't understand why people would vote for Donald Trump again is the same sort of rhetoric that we heard in 2016. And to be honest with you, like, I do get why people voted for him, and in that sense. And I think that unless we do, we can't like help people. We cannot ever beat him if we do not understand why people voted for him to begin with. And I think that is a very important aspect of where our party has got to hold on to, is that, like, everybody is somebody worth talking to about this election. And that is how we have approached a campaign in North Carolina, like trying to make sure that we're talking to every single voter. And this election is close, right? Because, like, there is so much disinformation that is spread for years and years. And, like, a lot of times, right, people's first initial response is to believe the first thing that they hear of a story, or the first iteration of a story that they hear, not necessarily whether that be the truth. And I think that we have a lot to do as a community and as a country, honestly, to be able to fight back against that. But I do think that the number one driver of, like, why you do see such a difference between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, the reason why it's close right now, is because of disinformation in so many ways.
I completely agree with you and misspoke, and you're right to call me on it.
Not that you misspoke in that sense.
I get it. No, you're right. You're totally right. I do understand why people vote for him, and I think that when we're done and win, journalism is going to be a topic that we have to spend a lot of time on, because Americans, so many Americans do not know what these two candidates stand for here at the end of this race.
We have to have more people like you, Edwin, right? Like, out there telling the truth about it. And I think giving people the platform. And a lot of our rural communities have only had one person talking at them for a really long time, and that is something where we're building out and back to.
Yeah, and when truth is behind a paywall, it gives a lot of room for nonsense.
Yeah.
Anderson, talk about, just remind people the size of the effort you've put together. How many people have been out talking to their neighbors? How many doors have you knocked on? How many races that no one was competing in and now have people competing in them? Like, just talk about the magnitude of the effort.
North Carolina is set to break some historic records this year in terms of the numbers that we've knocked as a campaign, as a state party. Over 1 million doors in the state have been surpassed by our coordinated campaign, the Harris-Walz team and the state party here in the state. And so we're really excited about it. And we are contesting 168 out of 170 state legislative seats here in North Carolina. We unfortunately left 44 seats uncontested in 2022. And so we made recruitment a very big priority for us this year, because even under gerrymandered state legislative maps, everybody deserves somebody to vote for, not just against. And we were really excited about that this year. And so a competitive effort was made in that case. And then we are also excited about being on the doors and seeing the fact that over 3 million people have also voted in North Carolina so far. So we are on set to break 2024 or 2020 numbers in 2024, and things are looking great for Democrats in that sense too.
Wow. I mean, that is really amazing. And I mean, you started basically from scratch. I mean, you didn't inherit too much when you started this job.
We We did. I think that the cool thing is been able to see how many staff members we've been able to bring on, and the number of just volunteers across the state. And earlier when you were talking about, I was sitting there, I was telling myself that it's not me that's doing all of this. When you were like, it's Anderson, Clayton, and Abe Lincoln, and I'm like, no, it is all the people on the ground. We have such incredible volunteers. We have such incredible candidates. North Carolina is a really unique state because we have we are one out of 11 states that have an election called Council of State, which are 10 statewide races in North Carolina. It's a little bit wonky, but for my political science nerds out there that may be interested in it, we have 15 statewide races in North Carolina this year, from our judicial to our executive branch, and then also to our Council of State races like that, and also at our federal level with Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. And so North Carolina has a lot of really great candidates for people to come out and vote for, and those folks have been across the state this year. People like Wesley Harris running for state treasurer in North Carolina because we elect that position here. I have just been all over the rural parts of the state campaigning and trying to bring, Democrats back out into these areas that we've not been in a long time. And it's really exciting to see the type of ground game that we've seen in all of our rural counties too right now.
I think Democrats have a great message for rural America. I mean, Democrats aren't the ones closing hospitals and schools.
Yeah. I mean, Republicans are also the ones defunding the number one economic driver in your community right now. Yep. And it's like, if they really want your community to survive, they would not be defunding public education. And that is the biggest priority, at least coming out of my General Assembly over the last 2 years in North Carolina, has been sending more money out of public schools into private schools, and doing that through people that could have already afforded to do private school anyway if they wanted to, and did not need government tax dollars to help the system to do it. And so I think it's one of the biggest right-wing sort of takeovers of the Republican Party that we've seen. A party that once instituted public education in North Carolina and helped do that too and believed in it. It's kind of wild to see them take such a backwards approach to it now.
Here we go again. You and I can't help ourselves. We're going to talk about policy, right? Even in the teeth of closing time of the election, we just can't help ourselves because that's what makes us Democrats.
And also it helps drive people, when young people, especially when they understand the policy that's at stake at the ballot box, they're more inclined to vote. And so I think it is always important to emphasize what type of policies our parties stand for right now, and that is something that's important. So I appreciate you doing that, Edwin, with us.
Hey, you guys suffered this horrific hurricane, and then this horrific hurricane of lives afterwards. Is that how is that going to impact turnout? How is it going to impact the election? Is it going to impact it at all? And how have recovery efforts gone?
I mean, there's not enough words, I think, to describe really what happened with Hurricane Helene in Western North Carolina. And our hearts are going out to folks that are still out there recovering and building back. We were just in Asheville yesterday, and we were also in Burke County before that. And so just making sure, checking in with folks and making sure that people are all right. But also a lot of people were out doing wellness checks. The Democratic Party's out there just turned their entire operations for Get Out the Vote into wellness check operations. And Buncombe County Dems, at the leadership of Drew Reisinger, who's the Register of Deeds in that county and is a Democrat, ended up doing 12,000 wellness checks in Buncombe County alone. And so we were just really grateful to everybody that stepped up, communities that came together, the volunteer firefighters, and all of our state and federal responders that allowed for everybody to have such a quick response to the incident that happened, because it took everyone by surprise, right? No one expected Western North Carolina to be ravaged by such damage like that.
Yeah.
But election-wise, and I'm sorry, you asked about turnout. My first response is always to get there and talk about recovery efforts, because to your point, I think it's the most important part of that. But election workers across Western North Carolina deserve all of our thanks and praise, because out of the 80 early voting polling locations that we had in the over 35 disaffected counties in the western part of the state, a geographical landmass the size of the state of Massachusetts, for anybody that needs to understand that collectively in their heads. But there were 75 out of 80 of the polling locations still open for early vote, which is the stretch that we're in right now, up until November the 2nd. And we still anticipate all of our election day sites to be able to be open as well. But all of our Board of Elections members in our state, whichever have allowed for all of our folks to be able to do different early vote plans if they needed to, and sort of made a special case for the counties that were affected by Hurricane Helene to be able to do drop off early vote or vote in other precincts in other counties if they needed to, and they were disaffected location wise.
Hearing that reminds me of something that I've talked to other people about. I don't think you and I have. In a democracy, the work that people do, when neighbors look at each other and they say, how do we make our community better? They go out and they do politics together, and they do other things together. But so the work that you've done to build, to create on-ramps for the people in your state who care about it to become part of an organization, a political organization mostly, but it also gave them the structure to step in when a disaster struck. And it feels to me like the work that you and others around the country have done to enable citizens to step up about things that matter to them, people who otherwise were sitting at home worrying, but instead could get out and do stuff, that on top of the political impact, which I hope it has a different kind of impact, one that makes communities healthier, that makes communities stronger, that makes people feel safer and more in charge of their lives. And I wonder if you've seen that.
I mean, I definitely think that politics helps people in ways that you couldn't imagine. And I have just seen people step up this year in ways that I couldn't have even thought that they would. And it's just been amazing to see. And so yes, is the answer, I think, to that question. But yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I just think you build such strong communities that'll last way past this election. Neighbors who've gotten to know each other, neighbors who've shouldered together a burden. They end up being able to make their schools better. They end up being able to build new playgrounds and, stuff that is not political. But because they have seen each other and worked together, they've overcome some of that alienation that has been such a part of America, for the last 20 years.
No, definitely. And I think that what you're going to see is that the election's the easy part. The hard part is when we actually get to the governing afterwards. And that's when we're really going to test whether or not, the unity is something that I think that people utilize to continue coalition building in communities, that we don't always have to agree about everything with the people that we are going into a city council room with or a county commissioner room with, because those are the people that also have our best interest with, like, our interests all align with each other. And that's something that I think we've surfaced in a lot of communities in North Carolina this year, but we've got a long way to go. I think about it and I'm like, 2024 for us only scratches the surface. And I think that we have a good plan for municipal races in 25 and looking at 26's Supreme Court race again, because, our road in our state is a long game in terms of our judicial races. Like, I want to end partisan and racial gerrymandering in North Carolina, and that means that we have got to flip a Supreme Court, which means looking at 2026 elections and 2028 elections, and how do you build on-ramps to continue to educate people about judicial races and the impact that that's had on democracy overall in our election system, as it sits in the South in general, too.
Yeah, Anderson, the person I was talking to right before talking to you was Ben Wickler, who had, of course, the exact same path that you're on now. He just got a couple years head start and had to flip a Supreme Court in order to end the gerrymandering there. It can be done.
It can, and I'm lucky because Ben has given such a good roadmap to be able to do it. And
Yep.
North Carolina this year followed a lot of what Wisconsin modeled with Judge Janet, and
Yep.
we're hoping to see that will pan out with Justice Allison Riggs maintaining her seat on the bench in North Carolina, we hope.
Let me ask this terrible question should never have to be asked, but do you have any concerns in North Carolina about making sure the votes get counted on time, get counted honestly, certified, and all of that?
No, we have every faith in our elections process and our folks that are running our elections right now in North Carolina. And our Board of Elections members have done a fantastic job in making sure that any of the issues that we have flagged, that our hotline has come in and brought in. I mean, you are always going to have You've got everyday folks are running our elections. I always like to remind people of that too. You definitely have people out there that can make mistakes, and so that will always be the case. But there is allowed for human error in an election in the sense of, somebody. We, at one point in time last year, had somebody get turned away from a polling location because the poll worker thought their ID was not one of the right ones, that it was a valid ID for their student ID in that sense. And it was. And so, they called the voter protection hotline that we have in North Carolina, and we told them they should be able to go back and vote. And I mean, incidences like that have happened, but making sure that people understand their rights and know them when they go into the ballot box is also one of the most important education games that we could be playing, and trying to make sure that we help educate all of the poll workers and across the state that, Republicans have been instituting a lot of policies over the last, year, right, to make it harder for people that have worked the polls for cycle after cycle to have to institute new things at the ballot box. And voter ID is just one of those.
And some states, people are worried about violence and intimidation, folks who show up. You see any indication that's going to be an issue for you?
I mean, it is definitely a heightened sense, especially in rural communities right now, about you've got Trump folks outside of polling locations and such like that. But Democrats have just tried to make it so that we've had a bigger presence this year across the state, and any place that we have heard of any type of outside the polling location, sort of harassment in the parking lot, we've reported it, and we are just trying to keep on track with that.
Yeah, and look, I mean, Trump folks, like our folks, they're entitled to be out there. And we should expect to see them and wave at them and say hi. They're our neighbors, after all. And then go and vote against their guy. I think that's what's going to happen. Anderson, is it too late? I mean, we got 2 more days. What can people do?
No, it's not too late. It's not too late until the last little minute of voting is done, which is on Election Day at 7:30 p.m. in North Carolina. So if you've got time to help us out, if you are interested in getting involved with voter protection efforts in the state, we are going to be doing ballot chasing, ballot curing, and all of that jazz. So if you're interested in getting involved with that, ncdp.org is where you can go. And I should have said that slower probably because of my accent, but if you Google the North Carolina Democratic Party, you'll find our website. Kat Lawson, who's our voter protection director, has been phenomenal. And also, if you're interested in getting out and making phone calls with us, or if you want to buy that last minute flight and come to North Carolina and help us out, we're always more than welcome to put you up in a nice little place to stay. So you let us know.
All righty. And where are you going to be election night?
I'm going to be in Raleigh. My dad, I'm working the polls on Election Day because my dad is running for county commissioner in Person County, where I grew up. And
how
he
great.
filled one of my It is. He filled one of my hard-to-win seats this year because Person County is an R+20 county. But I'm really grateful for my dad for doing it because he stepped up to make sure that democracy was upheld this year, and we're proud of him for it. So I'm going to work a polling site for him that day, and then I'm going to head to Raleigh for our watch party that night with all of our council state candidates, and I'm very excited to have, hopefully Josh Stein win our governor's race, which we think is looking good right now, but also us take our council state and win a Supreme Court seat and break a supermajority in North Carolina, and we'll be doing all right on election night.
You'll be doing all right, maybe even deliver us a president.
We hope so, that too.
Yeah. Well, listen, thank you again for spending time with us here in the Upper Midwest and sharing what's going on down there. And, bless you for everything. It's just fabulous what you've done.
No, thank you for everything that you're doing, too. We really appreciate it.
Talk to you on the other side.